Guys, I'm back with some updates. So made some great progress in regards to kind of getting everything cleaned up and situated, and I want to walk through it real quick. This is again with the CompRT 10-inch. So I was able to go ahead and adhere the voice coil to the assembly, which is the cone assembly and the surround. I kind of want to show you this. Nothing's completely put together yet, but I wanted to kind of see a quick fit just to make sure everything works out. I haven't really soldered the tinsel leads on, and I'll do that. But let me disassemble everything carefully and kind of walk through what we've done here so far. So, shown in the last video, I went ahead and placed 5-minute epoxy around the triple ring. In this particular case, I guess it's really a double ring because it's not really holding the spider in there. But if I look closely, this is where the 5-minute epoxy holds the physical voice coil itself, or the former, down to the actual assembly itself. So I was able to get that lined up like I showed with the Sharpie, get it leveled out, and went ahead and placed 5-minute epoxy and just let it sit there for overnight until it really adhered and held together. So the next step was the spider, and you're going to be looking at this saying, why does it look like that? Well, since this is not the exact spider for this subwoofer, it would have required some modifications in order to really inverse what it looks like now. Usually your spider leads, your tinsel leads are on the top side of this spider here, not the bottom, which is fine. It's still going to perform the same, but just because of the fit and how it was aligned, I wanted to minimize how much I modified or cut the spider to keep its integrity. And it was a really consistent place where I can adhere it to the actual assembly. So it was perfect to kind of get, let me point here, this inner ring attached to the bottom portion. You might have to kind of rewind in the video to show what that looked like, but it's just fit on there very, almost perfect. Same diameter, so that was great, and I just kind of put epoxy and it held really, really well in there. And so there was no point of inversing it, or else it would have been on the top side. It wouldn't have had as much surface area to hold on to. So that was okay. And so what I did is the tinsel leads were actually up here, and so I cut a hole, very small hole in here, removed the threading, stuck all 4 tinsel leads through the bottom, and that way I was able to solder them, very hard to see here, into the voice coil leads. And so you'll see all 4 are sticking right in there. And if I can get a better image, here it is. Sorry about that. Let me see if it will zoom in. There we go. And so there are the tinsel leads through the spider, and they are, I took the voice coil leads and I wrapped it around and I soldered, made sure I had a good connection. And then I reinforced it during a lot of this vibration and frequencies from anywhere, like you said, 10 to, I don't know, 150 hertz. I wanted to make sure that none of this disrupts the connection or weaken the coil where it snaps off. So did that on both sides. There we go. And reinforced it with E6000. Again, I got a couple of new tubes of E6000. Last time I used that Gorilla Glue, which is equivalent, but this is good. I let this also adhere for about overnight. So it's pretty nice and solid, but yet still allows a little bit of flexibility, which is great. So overall, this looks good. And the next step now is to go ahead and get that mounted. But before I did that, I went ahead and cleaned the motor assembly. I did a couple of different things. First, I removed all the carbon deposits I mentioned here. That was all over here, and got that really cleaned out here, though you can't really tell because of the black enamel finish that it's got on there. So clean that up, and then you can see the remnants of the old spider. Again, I could have easily, well, not easily, I could have removed all of it, but again, just because of the texture, it's almost kind of perforated and rough, which is going to be a great surface for me to bond to. You have the option, of course, you can remove it completely, but when I did my dry check, or dry run, see this flat surface, especially this side I'm touching, is gonna sit nice and flush right on here. And I'm gonna be able to just kind of put adhesive all around, and it's gonna sit and make a really good bond. Plus, the remnants of this old spider is on there pretty good. So I can, again, work with my chisel and my Dremel tool and work it, but path of least resistance, right? And then it should just function exactly the same. So that is good to go. I got the motor cleaned up. In regards to, again, removing carbon deposits, I used adhesive in here and abrasives and IC Propol. Cleaned up really well. Also took some what do they call, popsicle sticks, and stuck some very robust paper towel with the cleaning agent on here and cleaned it all out. Used my air compressor, blew that out. So try to get as good of a clean surface in there, ensure there's no wire. So it looks great. I'm excited. And last thing also, I did remove the rubberized adhesive that holds the surround to this ring. So you can see it looks pretty good as well. So that's going to be ready for some E6000s once I get to it. And overall, I'm pleased with how this is coming along. I will say one thing when I was doing this, and I noticed this on some of the other assemblies. If you notice, these holes help allow the voice coil to breathe. What it does is it circulates air through it and it cools it down. A hot voice coil is what kills a subwoofer, period. You run too much current through it, it gets hot. And so advantage of it is a subwoofer moves a lot of air even inside of whatever enclosure you have. And so it's always nice to figure out how to get that air to circulate around the voice coil. And that's what they do here. So what I noticed on some of these subwoofers, and it may be, I don't know, you guys will have to correct me. When I look at online pictures, I see there's a sticker right over here. And the sticker prevents air moving through these holes, which allows circulation from this area down to where the voice coil is. So I'm wondering why that's the case, why Kicker puts those on there. This was removed, and you can see there's remnants of the polyfill that was in a box, which is the right thing to do. But I also noticed that in the box, this was right against the bottom plate. So again, I'll have to go back. I can't confirm it, but just from my basic search on the web and looking at pictures of these, that Kicker puts a big old sticker back here, and it makes me wonder why they'd cover up these vent holes. That also, and I noticed that in the previous voice coil, it did not have any air holes. Again, you'll see this around the former here, these openings, and the intent is, as this is kind of going up and down, up and down, up and down, and pushing a lot of air through it, the air is circulating around the voice coil to kind of help the cooling mechanism, right? So it wasn't on the original one. It is on this replacement. So I would expect, ideally, for better performance. But again, I can't really measure that until I run some power through it. So, okay. So the next step, again, I am going to get these tinsel leads in a position where I know how I'm going to solder it. Right now, they're not really soldered at the top. The old tinsel leads actually had these tiny little holes drilled in there, and they were fed through those holes, and then they were soldered on the back end. And so I got to get creative and figure out how I'm going to do it, because I don't have small cylindrical tinsel leads. I have this braid, flat braid. So I'm going to figure out a creative way that, minimizes the stress on the tinsel leads, but allows me to make a good connection. I'll probably run it through this back hole right here where my finger is, the tiny slit in the back, and provide insulation around it to ensure it doesn't short out to the actual frame. So that's the next step. Once I put that in there, well, I'm sorry, I won't solder it. I'm gonna put the spider in. Well, let me back up a little bit. So I'm going to figure out how I'm gonna run the tinsel leads, but I'm not gonna solder them just yet. Then I will go ahead and place the assembly in here. I will align it with my handy dandy spacers, most likely my pieces of thick paper or cardboard that is equivalent in thickness, and make sure that the voice coil is equally distributed around the center of the motor here. And once I do that, before I'm gonna fill this entire area that you see colored in the yellowish color, most likely with epoxy, just so it can have a really strong bond. And then I will place it in there and I'll put a little bit of weight and I'll get in there with my fingers from these openings and try to put a little bit of pressure on there just to make sure it holds firmly, and it should. And let that settle for probably overnight. And then I'll come back, again, remove the paper, make sure that it's equally centered. If it's not, I'll have to rip everything out. So, but that will be the first step. And once I ensure that this is good to go, again, what I'll do, I'll go ahead and solder the tinsel leads before I put the adhesive here for the surround. So I'll solder both sets of tinsel leads to this assembly, and I'll walk through that to see what I came up with. And then the very final step, once I'm confident the tinsel leads are making good connection, the spider is adhered to pretty well to the frame, the coil is pretty centered, I'll put my paper back in here, make sure it's also continues to be centered. Then I'll put the E6000 around this area, right under the foam, which I already cleaned up and everything like that, under the surround, excuse me. And then I'll use my famous clips to hold it in place for 24 hours. And then I will remove all the clips and run some power through it, make sure it's good to go. And then the final step, I'll go ahead and add this mounting ring. Again, this is more for cosmetics. I wouldn't expect that I need to put this on for testing, but I may. It didn't look like there's a lot of adhesive holding this in place, so I think we should be good. But yeah, looks pretty good. I guess one last thing I also wanted to mention, if you do look closely on here, this voice coil, in the beginning of the video I mentioned, come in various heights. This is obviously too tall, where I'm not going to be able to place my center dust cap on there again. So what I will do is I will go back and take my snippers, and right above where the voice coil wires come out, I am going to snip all the extra former. There is no winding around there. And so I will snip very top and try to make sure it's equally cut. That way it's pretty flush with the surface, and when it's ready, I can just slip this dust cap on and use some E6000 to hold it in place. So getting there, getting very close. Hopefully you enjoy it, and I'll be back with the final assembly.